Rhaenyra just lost the one man who has been quietly holding her entire war together, and she does not even know it yet. Forget dragons for a second. Forget blacks and greens. The single biggest blow to hit King's Landing this episode did not come from fire or blood. It came from a group of river lords jumping out of the dark and grabbing the richest man in Westeros right off the road. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, the man who built an empire out of nothing, the man who gave Rhaenyra ships, gold, and legitimacy when almost nobody else would, is gone. Captured. Alive, probably. But completely out of the game at the exact moment the Queen needs him the most. And here's the part that should really worry you if you are Team Black. This was not some random accident of war. This was planned. John Roxton did not stumble onto Corlys and his men by chance. He was waiting for them. Which raises a question nobody in King's Landing is asking yet. How did the enemy know exactly where and when to strike? Somebody talked. And if somebody talked, that means Rhaenyra's court has a leak, and that leak might already know more about her plans than half of her own council. So stick around, because we are about to break down exactly what happened, why it matters way more than it looks like on the surface, and what this could mean for the rest of the season, because Corlys being off the board changes everything. Let's slow down and actually look at what just happened, because on first watch it might seem like a small moment tucked into the end of the episode. A quick skirmish, a few dead men, nothing more. But when you actually sit with it, this is one of the most consequential scenes of the entire season so far. Corlys and his Velaryon men were riding out on the edges of King's Landing with one simple job: help restore order in a city that has been falling apart ever since the Gold Cloaks abandoned their post by the dozen. Remember, we just watched an entire sequence of city guards deserting because they had not been paid in weeks and were being hunted in the streets. Rhaenyra's grip on her own capital was already slipping before this ambush even happened. Corlys and his men were meant to be part of the fix, a show of strength, a way to keep the nobles from thinking the Queen could not even control her own seat of power. Instead, they rode straight into a trap set by John Roxton, and just like that, the fix became a catastrophe. Now, who exactly is John Roxton, and why does this name matter so much? In the histories, House Roxton holds lands out toward the Riverlands and the Western Reaches. Minor lords by Westerosi standards, but minor houses have a habit of becoming major problems when they decide to gamble everything on the winning side of a civil war. The fact that Roxton was willing to risk an open attack on Velaryon men flying the banner of a queen who commands dragons, tells you something important. He was confident. Nobody stages an ambush like this unless they believe the risk is worth the reward. And the reward here could not be bigger. The single most powerful non-Targaryen figure in Rhaenyra's camp, taken off the field in one clean strike. Think about who Corlys actually is for a moment, because it is easy to lose track of just how much weight this one man carries. He commanded the largest merchant and war fleet in the known world before the war even started. He gave Rhaenyra a navy when she had none. He gave her legitimacy through his marriage into the Targaryen bloodline, a marriage that tied the wealth of Driftmark directly to her cause. He has buried 2 sons and a wife for this family. He has bled for this family in ways almost nobody else on that council has. And now, in one badly guarded ride through contested territory, all of that experience, all of that command, all of that leverage is sitting in an enemy camp instead of fighting for the Queen. This is the kind of moment that book readers have been waiting to see play out on screen, because the political fallout from something like this rarely stays contained to just one person. It ripples outward. It changes alliances. It makes people who were sitting on the fence suddenly start doing math about which side is actually going to win. And right now, with the Gold Cloaks gone, the streets in chaos, and her most reliable ally sitting in enemy hands, Rhaenyra's math is not looking good at all. What makes this even more painful is the timing. This did not happen in some random earlier episode when the war was young, and losses could be absorbed. This happened with only 2 episodes left in the season, right as everything is supposed to be building toward a climax. Losing Corlys now is not a setback the show can quietly fix in a later scene. It is a wound that is going to bleed straight into the finale, and probably beyond it. So when we say Rhaenyra just had one of her worst days as queen, we genuinely mean it, because everything that made her position stable is now falling apart at the exact same time, and she has not even gotten the news yet. To really understand how badly this hurts Rhaenyra, you have to look at what her whole plan for King's Landing was actually built on, and how much of it depended on people like Corlys doing exactly what he was doing when he got captured. Remember, This episode already showed us a queen who is struggling just to hold her own throne room together. She cut herself sitting on the Iron Throne, a moment the show clearly wants us to read as an omen, since we are reminded that past kings who bled on that throne did not exactly go on to have happy endings. She had to be walked out of the throne room because the pressure of ruling a city that no longer trusts her was becoming too much in that moment. Her mistress of whisperers is lying to her about a secret pregnancy inside her own family. Her gold cloaks are abandoning their posts faster than she can replace them. And her solution to all of this instability was to lean on the people she trusted most, sending Daemon to root out fanatics, sending Corlys and his men to help secure the city, asking the Baratheon envoys for support she was not even sure she could rely on. Every single piece of that plan required loyal, competent people operating in a city and countryside that is rapidly turning hostile. Corlys getting captured does not just remove one general from the board, it exposes exactly how fragile that entire plan was to begin with. If the queen cannot even move her own sea snake safely through the outskirts of her own capital, what does that say about her actual control of the region? It says the same thing Ormond Hightower has been counting on this entire time, that King's Landing under Rhaenyra looks weak, looks unstable, and looks like a place great houses should start reconsidering their loyalty to. Remember what we already know about Ormond's strategy. He has been deliberately stoking unrest inside the city through Hightower loyalists, hoping that if the nobles see Rhaenyra struggling to govern her own seat, they will start switching allegiances toward Aegon and eventually toward installing Daeron on the throne. Every single thing that has happened this episode, the Gold Cloak desertions, the failed assassination attempt from the Baratheon impersonators, and now Corlys being captured, feeds directly into that exact narrative. It is starting to look less like a string of bad luck, and more like a coordinated campaign to make Rhaenyra look unfit to rule, and honestly, right now, it is working. There is also a brutal irony buried in this capture that is worth sitting with. Corlys spent this entire war trying to prove that House Velaryon belonged at the center of Targaryen power, that his blood, his fleet, and his loyalty had earned him a permanent seat at the table. He fought Daemon over political standing, he clashed with Rhaenyra over strategy, he has quietly carried resentment about being treated as a tool rather than a partner for years. And in the end, it is not a dragon or a rival claimant that takes him off the board. It is a minor river lord and an ambush on a dirt road, the least glamorous, least dignified way for a man of his stature to fall. If you know anything about how Corlys has approached every setback in his life, from losing his sons to losing his standing at court, you know pride is one of his defining traits, and there is nothing that wounds pride quite like being outmaneuvered by someone he would consider beneath him. That detail alone should tell you this capture is going to matter for his character just as much as it matters for the politics around him, because a proud man handed a humiliating defeat rarely reacts to it quietly. Now here's where things get genuinely interesting, because capturing Corlys is one thing, deciding what to actually do with him is a completely different problem. And every single option on the table comes with massive risk attached. Let's start with the most obvious move, using him as a bargaining chip. Corlys is arguably the single most valuable hostage either side could hope to take at this stage of the war. He is not just wealthy, he is family by marriage to the Targaryen line. He commands loyalty across half the known world through decades of trade relationships, and his name alone carries enough weight to shift how other great houses view this entire conflict. If the Greens play this smart, they do not need to hurt him at all. They just need to let Rhaenyra know they have him, and watch how quickly that changes her calculations. Would she trade territory for him? Would she pull back forces she desperately needs elsewhere just to secure his release? Every decision she makes from this point forward now has to account for the fact that her enemies are holding one of her most important pieces hostage, and that kind of leverage can quietly reshape a war without a single additional battle being fought. Then there is the darker possibility, the one that would send shockwaves through the entire conflict. What if they decide Corlys is more dangerous alive than he is valuable as a hostage? Executing him outright would be an enormous gamble. It would almost certainly enrage Rhaenyra into a far more aggressive response. But it would also permanently remove one of the most experienced strategic minds on the black side, a man whose knowledge of ports, trade routes, and naval command cannot easily be replaced. Whoever is making decisions on the ground with Corlys in custody now has to weigh a very tempting short-term gain against a very real risk of provoking exactly the kind of retaliation that could bring dragons down on their heads. But there is a third option here that might actually be the most dangerous one for Rhaenyra, And it is the one we should be paying the most attention to. What if Corlys can be turned? Think about everything this man has sacrificed for the Black cause and gotten in return. He has lost 2 sons and a wife fighting for this family. His own children were only legitimized after enormous political struggle. He has been overruled, sidelined, and treated with suspicion by people who owe their entire war effort to his fleet and his fortune. Sound familiar? It should, because we already saw this exact pattern play out with Corlys' own son this very episode, a man who gave up everything for the crown and got nothing but resentment and mistrust in return. If Corlys sits in captivity long enough to actually think about how thin the gratitude from Rhaenyra's side has really been, and if the right person offers him respect, position, and a genuine seat at the table instead of being treated like a resource to be spent, do not be shocked if the sea snake starts asking himself some very uncomfortable questions about which side actually deserves his loyalty going forward. A man that proud, that experienced, and that repeatedly underappreciated is exactly the kind of person a smart enemy tries to recruit rather than simply ransom or kill. And if the show is setting up parallel storylines about loyalty shifting under pressure, which it very clearly has been doing all episode with characters like Ulf and Hugh, then Corlys becomes the biggest possible domino in that entire pattern. So where does all of this actually leave us heading into the last stretch of the season? First and most immediately, King's Landing has almost no organized force left to keep order. Between the Gold Cloak desertions and now the loss of Corlys and his men, Rhaenyra genuinely does not have anyone she can rely on to secure her own capital, and that vacuum is not going to stay empty for long, because Ormond's entire strategy has been built around exploiting exactly this kind of collapse. Expect the unrest inside the city to escalate quickly, and expect Rhaenyra to be forced into decisions she has been actively avoiding, including that terrifying option everyone keeps circling back to, using dragonfire to force order back onto a city and a countryside that no longer trusts her leadership. Second, this capture puts an enormous amount of pressure on the people around Rhaenyra who are already showing cracks. Remember Daemon's constant push toward more aggressive, more violent solutions throughout this episode? Remember how frustrated he already is with the Council's caution. Losing Corlys removes one of the more measured voices in that room, and hands Daemon exactly the kind of justification he needs to argue that soft approaches are not working, and it is time for something far more brutal. If you have been waiting for Daemon to finally get his way on strategy, this might be the moment that pushes the Council in his direction. Third, keep a very close eye on how this affects the loyalty questions already bubbling around Ulf and Hugh. We already know both men are being quietly primed to switch sides. Ulf humiliated in the streets and watched by a Hightower spy. Hugh torn apart by his wife's accusations and the cost his family has paid for a dragon he barely gets to enjoy the benefits of. Now add Corlys into that same emotional territory, another man who has given everything to this cause and watched it cost him people he loves without receiving the respect or reward he was promised in return. If the show wants to build toward a genuinely devastating finale, tying these threads together, showing multiple pillars of Rhaenyra's support, quietly deciding they have had enough of being used and discarded, would be an incredibly effective way to do it, and Corlys sitting in enemy custody, with time on his hands to reflect on exactly how thin his gratitude from the crown has really been, fits that pattern perfectly. Finally, do not underestimate what this does to the wider political map. Word of Corlys' capture is going to spread fast, and every great house that has been sitting on the fence, weighing whether to back Rhaenyra or start hedging their bets elsewhere, is about to receive one more very loud signal that her position is weaker than it looks. Combine that with Boros Baratheon already dragging his feet under a flimsy excuse, and you can see exactly the kind of momentum Ormond Hightower has been patiently building toward this entire season. A slow bleeding away of support until Rhaenyra wakes up one day and realizes the throne she is sitting on is far more isolated than she ever let herself believe. With only 2 episodes left, this capture is not a side plot, it is a fuse that has just been lit, and how it burns is going to shape everything that happens next. So that is where we stand, Corlys captured, the city on the edge of chaos, and a queen who is running out of people she can actually trust to hold things together. What do you think happens to him, ransom, execution, or does the sea snake end up switching sides before this season is even over? Drop your theories in the comments, I read every single one, and let me know which direction you think this story is heading. Thanks for watching, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next breakdown, and I will see you in the next one. There is one more layer to this capture that most people are going to miss on a first watch, and it has to do with timing that feels far too convenient to be a coincidence. Think back to everything else happening around King's Landing this same episode. Boros Baratheon is stalling both queens with the same tired excuse about fighting the Vulture King in the south, refusing to commit his army to either side while he waits to see who comes out ahead. A group of men dressed as Baratheon soldiers just tried to assassinate Darren at Tumbleton, only to be exposed by Gwaine. And now, on the exact same day the city is already reeling from Goldcloak desertions, Corlys gets ambushed on a road that Rhaenyra's own council should have known was dangerous. When you line all of that up, it stops looking like bad luck and starts looking like a pattern of pressure being applied on multiple fronts at once. Almost like someone wants both queens distracted, weakened, and second-guessing their own people at the exact same moment. That kind of coordinated chaos does not usually happen by accident in a story like this. It usually means there is a hand behind the curtain that we have not fully identified yet. And Ormond Hightower's fingerprints keep showing up in places that are technically outside his own camp, which should make you wonder just how many loyalists he actually has planted and waiting. There is also a quieter, more personal angle to this capture that deserves attention, and it involves Corlys' own family back home. Rhaenys is gone. His sons are gone. The only people left who might actually go to war over what happens to him now are the people he has spent years building resentment with, the same family members who watched him get overruled and dismissed at court time and time again. If word reaches Driftmark that the sea snake has been captured, does the response actually match the scale of who he is? Or does it expose just how thin his support network has become after everything this war has already cost him? A man who commands the largest fleet in the world should, in theory, spark a massive response the moment he is taken hostage. But if that response is slow, cautious, or half-hearted, it says something very uncomfortable about how much loyalty Corlys has actually earned versus how much power he simply controlled. That distinction matters a lot going into the final stretch of the season, because power without loyalty is exactly the kind of thing that crumbles fast once the person holding it is no longer in a position to enforce it himself. Then there is the question of what this does to Rhaenyra's confidence as a leader specifically. We already watched her nearly break down on the Iron Throne earlier in this same episode, cutting herself, staring at the statues of her ancestors, walking away from her own throne room in front of everyone. Now imagine her getting the news that Corlys, one of the very few people she has genuinely trusted with real responsibility since taking the city, is gone. This is not just a strategic loss. It is another brick pulled out from underneath a queen who is already visibly struggling under the weight of ruling alone. And every time she